Most people communicate in their day-to-day from their emotions. And emotions are governed by preference. You want to feel this way, not that way. I like this, I don't like that. And the preference is decided by your mind. And your mind lives in what? 2 dimensions, right? Good, bad, right, wrong, love, fear, this, that. That's how the mind operates. Unless you activate or develop what's known as the neutral mind, right? Or buddhi. That's where we get the word Buddha, the Buddha's mind, the ability to see the challenge and the solution at the same time. That's a master of communication. You don't buy into the trip. If somebody's really angry at you, sometimes you may need to respond the same way with immediate action, and sometimes it's not appropriate to respond that way. You have to be very aware of this. And these things start to happen really fast. It's not like you sit and meditate for an hour, just like hold that thought and you sit down and, I mean, that might work. You know, I talked about Ram Dass yesterday when he was on the board for the Seva Foundation. Have you heard of Seva Foundation? They give eyeglasses to people in Tibet and Nepal. They got a lot of problems with eye vision, and he started this foundation and then eventually had to sit on the board, which he didn't want to do because sitting on the board is very stuffy, you know. And so eventually he got tired of the stuffiness of the board, so he made a rule that anytime somebody was either A, too serious, or used the word serious, they had to wear those big clown sunglasses while they expressed the rest of their point. And he said, it changed everything. The meetings became so manageable and perfectly fine. Because don't we get caught up in the trip from time to time? And then you realize it's almost like you're standing outside of yourself looking at you going, oh God, who is that? You know? And one of my favorite stories about that is also a Ram Dass story. He tells about how he had given a rider, you know, a rider, like a rock star has a rider. When you go to play a show, you have these list of demands that have to be met for you to do the show. So he had sent his rider. It's a very simple rider, but the main one is that he wanted this microphone called a boom microphone, so that when he's sitting, like I'm sitting now, he doesn't have to lean forward into the mic. The mic leans into him, because after a while your back gets sore. So that's all it said in the rider. Very simple. There needs to be this boom microphone. And they arrive to give the talk, and they walk into the hall, and guess what microphone is sitting on the stage? The wrong microphone. And right away, Ram Dass, he said, I just laid into this poor lady. Like this curmudgeon-y, awful side of me came up. And then I had to stop myself. And I realized that my guru had arrived here in the room in drag as the microphone stand and was saying, oh, Ram Dass, you think you're so great? Let's see how you handle this one. And he missed the mark. You know, and he's about to sit like this and share all of the teachings. And the beauty of that teaching is that we all go there. You know, we come here and we are all loving for each other and doing the kriyas and chanting, and then we go out there and we miss the mark. It's no big deal. That's why forgiveness is such a key component of spiritual practice, right? And it starts with you. You make a mistake, when should you forgive yourself? Right away. Because otherwise you carry all this shame and you lose sight of who you are in relationship to your conditions. And we learned yesterday that you are not your conditions, you're you. You're the experiencer, not the experience. Right? And as yogis, we're dealing with this process of duality and learning to see beneath the surface, or to see the blessing and the challenge at the same time. And it's always there. That's the nature of duality. If there's a problem, what is there for sure? There has to be. That's the nature of duality. There can't be one without the other. They go together. That's why we have night and day. You couldn't just start praying that there wouldn't be night anymore. It would be absurd. That's how nature functions. There's always the other side. And as a yogi, you start to become aware of that. And you start to see it in people too. Right? You see the person, and then you see their conditions. You know? Have you ever... This is a good time to mention something like passion. Passion is a tricky word because it can be a tool or a weapon. Have you ever made a decision in the moment that caused a lot of harm? Probably, right? Have you ever known something to be true and acted from a place of passion and created a lot of good and benefit out of it? Yes. And you have to create a relationship with yourself in order to do that. If you don't know who you are in relationship to what you're passionate about, you make a mess. And if you do know who you are in relationship to what you're passionate about, the world is yours. So we're operating with all of this work on learning to see beyond the surface. The yoga practice is a journey from dense to subtle. Does that land for you? Dense is what's happening here on the surface. I like this, I don't like that, here I'm sitting, and on and on and on. When we do all these Kundalini Yoga techniques, we're starting to have an experience of something that you can't see. And you become a master of that. I was talking with Sean over breakfast about the Yogi Tea Company. You know the Yogi Tea Company? Yogi Bhajan started that tea company. And he said at the time, he just had like a vision that he said, he came into a bunch of his students and said, we're going to start the biggest herbal tea company in the world. It's a pretty lofty thing to just walk into the room and say, you know. And people said, yeah, whatever. Like, well, how about if we just start a tea company? How come it has to be the biggest one in the world? You know, and he said, that's what it has to be. And so they said, okay, we've got to get all these business advisors and people who know how to run a tea company and how to run this business. And so they hired all of these advisors, and the advisors kept ixnaying his ideas, saying, no, we can't do that. No, business doesn't work like that. Oh, no, we can't do that. So he came in after a little bit of this, didn't go long. He didn't suffer fools very well. He came into one of the meetings and said, fire all those people. Get rid of them. And his students said, sir, you can't just fire these guys. Like, they're the ones who are going to help build this business. They're the ones that have the business logic. And you know what he said? We're not going to run this company on logic. We're going to run it on magic. Get rid of them. And you know what happened eventually to the tea company? You know about it today. It became the biggest herbal tea company in the world. How come he could do that? He had a practice that trained him to look beyond the surface. You have to be a master of communication to do that. I told the story about the lady in the flower shop yesterday. That was a moment of looking beneath the surface. When you see something and you accept it just as it is, sometimes that'll serve you. There's a component of the mind that you need for that. For example, you can't drive your car with intuition. Right? Imagine you're driving, you get pulled over by the police, and you're explaining to them that you were driving that way because your intuition was directing the car, and you were, it's not going to work. You have a component of the mind that's needed to do things on the surface. That's a very dense experience, right? But how many people have thought of somebody and they phoned you? Or how many people, like yesterday I was saying to Sarah Jade, if I don't talk about my teacher, Guru Singh, then I don't have any contact with him. And then last night I was thinking about him and telling stories about him. He wrote me first thing this morning. That always happens, It's like, you can't explain that to a logical mind. It's like, what the heck's wrong with you? You're nuts. And yet we've had these experiences all the time. And the more you get into these practices, the more you start to see there's something to this. And then you use the logical mind, like, you want to be successful in business. You want to be a good parent. You want to be a good partner. You want to have prosperity in your life. You know, wherever this whole trip came from, that a yogi is supposed to deny all of these things and become celibate and live in a cave, is such a crock of BS. That came from religion. You know, how many people here are a monk or nun? Nobody, so that you can leave that alone. You heard of the concept brahmacharya before? Came through the lens of the Hindu religion, through yoga. Brahmacharya, if you were somebody who'd taken vows, you became a celibate person. But if you break down what the word brahmacharya means for a yogi, Brahma means God. And the word achar or acharya means action. It means to take action as God, to take action as the best version of yourself. I don't hear anything about celibacy in that. Take action as God. Well, you better not have sex. I don't understand where that came from. Came from religion. But the reason why I'm bringing all of this up is that we do these techniques, right? Do you keep your eyes open and look around while you're doing Kundalini Yoga? Do you use the logical mind, like, oh, this is happening, and then this is happening, and this is why this is happening? No. Eventually you'd get sick of your Kundalini Yoga practice. It would drive you nuts. You'd be thinking about all these. We were listening to this neuroscientist speak on a podcast that I like, and he said, because he has such a deep understanding of the brain, he hates dreaming. He said, every time I go to bed, it's like sticking my head in the night blender. That was the language that he used. Because he understands on the surface how everything's functioning. So when he's having a beyond the surface experience, it's like driving him insane. It's an interesting thing, right? And that's why the great spiritual masters shared this teaching across the board. To understand this stuff, what should you become like? A child. You understand? Like you hang around with a 5-year-old like I do, they'll teach you all about the wonders of what's going on beneath the surface. They'll remind you of who you are. It's a great gift. And we forget because we're buying into the trip of I'm a this and you're a that and we have to do this and you have to be logical and all of that. There's a place for it. I'm not asking you to be airy-fairy or anything like that. It's about paying attention beyond the logic. That's where compassion comes from. Logically, you have your child and you have a responsibility to take care of your child and you do that. Beyond the surface, you can see all children are your children. Kind of neat. And in order to see beneath the surface, who do you have to know really well? Yourself. Because you know who you are in relationship to the logical mind. Have you ever had a gut feeling about something? You just knew something to be true. And somebody said, well, why? It doesn't make sense to me. And you're like, I just can't do that because I know I'm not supposed to. There's something to that. The main center of communication, according to the yogis, is the navel. It's the center of connection. It's the center that reminds you that you're not by yourself, even though you may feel like that because of your conditions. In fact, every single one of you relied on another person to get here. You know how I know? You have a belly button. That's the symbol of your connection to the mother. It's not a mistake that you're designed like that. Some yogis say that the journey to enlightenment is the distance from your thumb to your pinky. Do you know what that means? from the navel to the heart. If you have an imbalanced relationship with yourself, it shows up in this region. And you start thinking about, what can I get? How can I benefit? How can I take advantage of the situation? You hear the language? It's very closed. You feel the language closing in on you. If you have very strong emotions, like anger, where do they come from? Same region. If you go to a Chinese doctor or an Ayurvedic doctor and you have anger issues, where does it show up? In the glandular system. Liver. People who have issues with alcoholism often have issues with who they are, the self, anger, How can we keep the navel balanced and open so we can connect to others? What does your mother give you when you're a baby in the womb? Nourishment, food. How can you keep the relationship with the self open and connected to move you into the heart? Share your resources. Yogi Bhajan said the journey from the navel to the heart is the journey from me to we. You share your resources beyond logic. Do you know when Yogi Bhajan came to Los Angeles, he had no money. $10 he came to Los Angeles with. He finally got a gig to teach. They paid him $75. Then when he left the gig from teaching, the woman he was with said, we're going to go eat some food. She knew he had no money. They went to have some food, and on the way in, there's a blind man selling pencils. And he tells Yogi Bhajan, I'm selling these pencils so that I can raise money for my family, and tells the whole story. Yogi Bhajan said, I'll take one pencil. Okay, sir, that's $2 or whatever he said. How about 75? He said, 75? You can have all these pencils. He said, I just need one. He gave the man $75 for one pencil. And he said the lady was angry at him. Not surprised, but she was mad. She was like, Yogi Ji, how can you have no money and give $75 for a pencil? And na. You hear the logical mind going there? The sound current of the logical mind goes like this. All up here. You ever talk to somebody like that, stuck in their head? Man, bring it down. Anyhow, he walks into the place. They get their food. They walk to the counter. And the lady at the counter says, somebody was here earlier, said a large man with a turban was going to come in for dinner, and he paid for your meal. You and the friend. He said, thank you. They went and sat down. She said, how did you know? He said, my guru will take care of me. Is that a very logical thing to do? And he said in his life, I've had $10, I've had millions of dollars, over and over. Because you show up with the mentality of how can I serve, not what can I get. Yoga means what? What does it mean? Union. Like unity? What can I get? Do you hear the unity in that? What's in it for me? How can I serve? That's a yogi. A yogi is practicing unity. If you don't practice unity, you'll suffer. You just will. It's the way it is. Don't we teach our children that? And then somehow when we get grown up, we go back to this is my toy. You hear it in the kids, right? And then we are correcting them. And then we go and do it ourselves. This is my thing. One of the great practices of a yogi during these times is to be a steward rather than an owner. You know what a stewardship means? What does it mean? to care for. Yeah. To care for all of this. That's what even, let's go even beyond a yogi and say a human. Human, the word human, hu is light. Man comes from the word manas. You know what manas means? Mind. Light mind. How can you become enlightened or awakened? You see the oneness everywhere. There's no difference between me and you. How could there be? We breathe the same air. We all want to feel loved and be free and feel beautiful. Nobody's left out of that. Nobody's walking around going, I hope I just have a terrible life and nobody loves me. Nobody's doing that. Even the people who are really in pain, deep down underneath, that pain is a call for love. Because they're human. Makes sense, doesn't it? And again, like we said, we'll hear it here, it'll make sense, and then we'll go out there and miss the mark. And what will we do right away? Forgive. Here's a radical concept. There's nothing happening on the planet Earth today that is beyond forgiveness. But wait, what about nothing? How do I know that? Because people are responding not from who they are. They're responding from their conditions. You know that Hitler wanted to be a painter? More than anything, that's what he wanted to do. He paid all this money to go to Vienna and study. And you know what? How many paintings of Hitler's have you seen? 0. He found it easier to go and cause all of this disruption than face the challenge of doing what he wanted to do with his life. That comes from fear. And then you start to buy into the fear and all of the things that fed into fear when you were young, like people who laughed at you and said you wouldn't be able to do it, you start hating them. And then if you let it happen long enough, what does it become? Neuroses. And if you let neuroses take a hold of you for long enough, what does that become? Depression. And when you're in depression, do you see a way out? No. Because you're fully defined by what? Your circumstances. You can't see any hope. But a yogi or a human who's living a full life, you know who you are in relationship to your conditions. Even if your conditions are terrible. You know the stories that really inspire you when somebody overcame adversity? Like they were born in an awful place and they knew who they were and they came up out of the muck like the lotus flower. We are so inspired by that because it's who we are. And who's capable of doing that? Everyone. You were born human, you have the means. So don't forget it and don't let anybody tell you otherwise. And the more you understand this, the more you'll be able to communicate, instead of from your preference, from your presence. Because you know who you are. Have you ever been around a person who's really comfortable in their own skin? Like you could take them anywhere and they would just be fine with it. That's amazing. Doesn't that make you feel good when you're around somebody like that? Because they know who they are. They're fully present. We always say that's like the cliche of yoga, be present. That means be in your presence. Know who you are. And learn to communicate from your depth rather than from the surface. And in order to communicate from your depth, you have to create a relationship beyond the surface. Subtle. Communicate from your relationship with yourself. And how will you influence from your presence? Who do you need to trust? Me? The government? A religious organization? Who? Yourself. Unapologetic human sovereignty. That's Kundalini Yoga. I know who I am. Does that mean that you're not going to face any challenge? You're not going to feel pain? You're not going to go through really tough times? No. You ever gone to a thing like this, like a really great, meditation weekend away, and you get all this scheme in your mind about how you're going to keep the vibe going, get up early, do all the things that you did while you were on the ladies' camp or men's camp or, Vipassana or whatever the thing you do. You take the challenge to do something good for you spiritually, and you have it all in your mind that you're going to keep the vibe going. And you know what happens when you get home? You face some really big challenges. You're expecting, you're just going to cruise in, everything, in the movies where everybody breaks into song that you've come home and everybody's singing together, and never.
Well, cats are happy sometimes.
Yeah, they're very sentient beings. Yeah, they see you for who you are. Your pets, they're not judging you looks like Sally's put on a bit of weight. Won't be sitting on her lap anymore. They see it. Angels, right? They're angels. And that's sort of how it works. That resistance is there to test you. Yogi Ji said unhappiness is a challenge. If you face it, it'll go away. If you avoid it, what will happen? It will double in size. And you know what he said about depression? One of my favorites. If you're depressed, what should you do? Press back. You know who you are. These conditions aren't you. You know how I know? I'm not in the same conditions as when I was 20. I'm not in the same conditions as when I was 25. I'm not in the same conditions as when I was 30. I'm not, and I could go on and on. But there is a part of me that is the same. That's why the yogis always say this: you are not the doer. Have you heard that expression? You think you are. In the logical mind, check me out. Look what all the things I can do with my human intelligence. And yet, how in control are you really? I don't know. You are and you're not. Like a DNA strand. There's a story that Ram Dass tells about how he was gone on a 30-day meditation to India, and he took all these students with him. And it was not a very fancy one. We went to Okanagan Yoga Fest. That was fancy compared to this. Like a stone bed. That's it. You're going to go and meditate and get away from all of the bells and whistles. So they get to the end of the 30 days. And he's agreed to go on this meditation trip because he wants to see his teacher in India. He hasn't seen him in a long time. And so they are driving on this bus leaving the meditation center, and somebody says, there's been this festival down by the riverbank. Maybe some of the people who haven't been to India would like to go and see it. And then some of the other people are going, we don't need to go to a festival. We need a hot meal and a shower. We've just been in this crazy, ashram life that is not fancy. And everybody's arguing about what we should do. And they're coming to this fork in the road. One way is the festival, one way is the shower and the hot meal. And they are looking to the teacher, Ram Dass, to say, which way should we go? So at the last minute he says, let's go to the river. So they turn, they go to the river. The festival, yeah. Not for the hot, it's not a hot river. They go to this really hot river. They go to the festival. And you know who the first person they see when they get off the bus is? Ram Dass's teacher, Neem Karoli Baba. Coincidence, right? Except for this part. As soon as they see him, he goes, I've been waiting for you guys all day. Come with me. They come with him to this tent where there's all this food that's been prepared for 30 people. And some of the students talk to the people in the kitchen. Oh, wow, this is amazing. Like, we didn't even know we were coming here. Oh, really? We've been preparing food for you all day. Neem Karoli Baba said you were coming. Ram Dass said, this is how I knew that there's free will and God's will, and they're dancing with each other. Because he could have said, let's go to the hot meal. You know? And the idea, like we talked about yesterday, is to do these techniques to get out of your own way. Because don't you get in your own way from time to time? And you don't have to get hung up about it. Remember what we said yesterday? Even your missteps are leading you to you. And how much resistance and suffering you experience along the way, who's that up to? It's up to my neighbors. They did this to me. My parents, they're the ones. We've got all these stories about it, you know. Donald Trump, he's responsible. You, it's up to you. Because you're going to face stress no matter what. It's part of living on earth. There's people praying for a life with no stress. Not going to happen. You know? And even if you did, let's say that you got a life with no stress. It'd get old pretty quick. In Buddhism, they have these realms called bardos. It means hell. You know what happens in the bardo realm? Same thing every day. Over and over and over and over and over and over. And your stress is there to serve you if you learn to be you. If you learn to communicate with the real you. Then you'll learn to communicate with everyone around you. And then, wow, you'll be able to really make a difference in the world. Because you'll see the conditions are not the person. You know how you can love your child even if they do something terrible? You know? Why can you do that? Because you know who you are and you know who they are. And a yogi, somebody who practices yoga, can see that in everybody. What did Yogi Ji say? If you can't see God in all, you can't see God at all. But what about so-and-so? He's a real
Do you ever think it's possible to see it easier in other people than yourself?
Depends on your conditions. Because if we take away all the conditions, what is there? Only one. So there really isn't any other people. But that's you relating to your conditions. It's all part of the experience. You know, in the Buddhist thought, the word mind is the same word as space. Where's space? Everywhere. Yeah, all of this is mind. Like we got this idea that somehow I'm over here and you're over there. And there's a gap between us. What if there's only mind between us? And we create some relationship with the mind where we can see the oneness. What's that called? Yoga. And we say like, oh, I'm going to do yoga. You can't do yoga. It's like saying, I'm going to go do oneness. I'm just going to go and do a oneness thing, and then I'll be back, and back to my separateness. But we experience it like that, don't we? So we're just going through the process, learning who we are. That's all we're doing here. And we have really wonderful teachers, and we have really awful teachers. You know, some terrible things happen in your life to remind you who you are. And some really wonderful things happen in your life to remind you who you are. And that's just the way it works. Why? I don't know the answer to that. I guess until we work out all the karma. And then what happens? Let's wait and see. Let's do our best to see the oneness everywhere. And then what? Extraterrestrial consciousness? Maybe the aliens who've been avoiding us for our terrible behavior will come and hang. You know, the aliens, they see how we treat animals on this planet, and they're like, I'm not going there. You see what they did to the cows? They came from, whatever planet, and then you know what they did? Okay, that's another thing, though. All right, so let's do a little exercise to bring some experience to this conversation. So you're going to sit with a partner, and SJ is going to go with somebody because we have an odd number, right? So sit with a partner and face each other. I think you go with her here.